The following program, The Russ Belville Show, is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate to the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate any illegal activity and encourage all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers on The Russ Belville Show are their own, and The Russ Belville Show cannot be held legally responsible for their validity or reliability. Viewer discretion is advised.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization.
And I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
To the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Yeah, I hear you had a question for me.
Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
All right, welcome everybody. Good day, and it is Monday, September 10th, 2012, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Welcome to the show. We're back live and better than ever, independently produced and broadcast right out of here at Rolla J Studios. Thanks for joining us on RadicalRuss.com, TheWeedBlog.com, and Pot.tv. If you'd like to embed this live show on your website, just check out RadicalRuss.com. Look in the About section and Webmaster Tools. All the embed codes are there. The chat codes are there. You can really increase the page duration time on your website. Just add RadicalRuss.com and get the word out for marijuana legalization in the United States of America and all throughout the country. We've got a great show coming up, and we're tightening things up here on the Russ Belville Show, making things fly fast and furious. There's going to be a lot of information coming at you, and we're going to start by going to our virtual studio in Astoria, Oregon. We're waiting there on the Skype line. We have our own Carrie Gallagher, our news director. Hello, Carrie.
Hi, Russ. So nice to be back.
It's nice to have you back. I'll have to have you boost your signal just a little bit because you're a little quiet out there, but good to hear you. We are doing the 420 headline news right after the first break. We are going to get the news stories to you right away, and we've got all sorts of great headlines coming up. Carrie, what's in the news today?
Well, first of all, quiet, me, never. But the first four stories that we're going to cover is for today on our first show, we're going to go to Arizona where they're actually reaping millions of dollars on their medical marijuana program. We're going to see what Paul Ryan, the bottom of the Republican presidential ticket, says about medical marijuana. We're also going to go to Arizona where the campaign to regulate marijuana like alcohol has filed a lawsuit over the weekend. And we've got a study coming out today that we want to talk about with testicular cancer and marijuana usage. That all coming up in today's headlines.
All right. Thank you, Carrie. And then we're going to go behind the headlines in our second segment and talk with Anthony Johnson from the National Cannabis Coalition. There's some dirty politics going on in Springfield, Missouri, where they passed a decriminalization measure for the city. We'll talk to him about that. Paul Armentano joins us at 5:30 to talk about the new study that's out on DUI cannabis and the 2 nanogram limit indicating double the crash risk. Is that true or not? We'll talk to Paul Armentano about that. We got your Roots Monday Daily Toker tunes coming up with Cab Calloway and some reefer jazz. And at the end of the show, time for a little radical rant. Is it time to legalize or is it time for a smoke-in? We're right back after this.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
We're not looking to end beer summits at the White House or change the way people behave on the campaign trail. We just believe adults, in the privacy of their homes, should be allowed to use marijuana instead of alcohol if that's what they prefer. 40 years ago, our government launched an irrational war on marijuana for reasons unrelated to the actual and limited harms of the substance. It's time for a more sensible approach. It's time to regulate marijuana. Paid for by the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana.
Rabba-dabba-goo! The Russ Belville Show reminds you to never smoke and drive impaired. Hang out for a while and share.
The day was hard and your work was long and you need a break from all that's wrong. You better look at the clock cause it's 4:19. Time to reach in that pocket for your bag of green and smoke that weed.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show. Medical marijuana, industrial hemp, ganja sacrament, consumer cannabis. The topic of marijuana is heating up the news, and the Russ Belville Show catches you up with today's latest headlines. Now, here's our senior news editor, Cannabis Carey, with the Daily Cannabis Chronicle.
According to reports in the Arizona Republic, the state has taken in over $9.3 million in medical marijuana patient and dispensary registration fees since beginning the program last year. About $2.5 million of that money has been sent on the staff of the Arizona Department of Health Services to administer the program, to fund research into the effectiveness of medical marijuana, and to purchase technology to run the nation's sole online-only medical marijuana registration program. Now the Arizona Department Health Service Director Will Humble will dip into the over $6 million that remains in that medical marijuana fund in order to, in his words, keep the program as medical as possible. ADHS will use $1.2 million in funds to audit the doctors who are recommending medical marijuana to Arizona's 31,000 patients, seeking those who may be improperly allowing their patients to use the non-toxic, low side effect Schedule I substance. Other uses of the funds will include the hiring of a private attorney at $450 per hour to deal with legal issues arising from the program, private accountants to audit the nonprofit operation of dispensaries, and training dispensary staff to recognize the signs of drug abuse and help patients track how much marijuana they are using and prevent them from combining marijuana with alcohol or narcotics. The legalization effort in Colorado State has filed a lawsuit against the state over the text in Colorado's voter's guide, known in the state as the Blue Book. State law requires that the supplemental voter's guide include all major arguments in support of each issue that appears on the ballot. But that campaign is saying that this year's Blue Book text has harmed their message. The Legislative Council that okays language in the Blue Book, according to the campaign, deleted 3 of the key arguments in support of the initiative. The 3 things left out of the Blue Book in support of Measure 64 is that marijuana is objectively less harmful than alcohol, that the current consequences of marijuana offenses are too severe, and that law enforcement resources would be better spent on more serious crimes. The campaign is reporting that they think that the lawmakers were confused and actually did not intend to delete those lines. The key arguments in support of Amendment 64 were deleted without the true 2/3 support. Now, with that deletion, the campaign says that the arguments for Amendment 64 section of the Blue Book is now only 208 words long following that deletion, whereas the arguments against has approximately 338 words, meaning the against has nearly 75% more words than the for section. Over the weekend, the campaign filed for a temporary restraining order to prevent the Blue Book from going to print with a text that has been modified. And a new study published in the Journal of American Cancer Society claims young men who smoke marijuana have twice the risk of aggressive testicular cancers. That was reported today by CBS News. Researchers from USC compared 163 men with testicular cancer to 292 healthy controls and surveyed them all on their history of drug use. After controlling for a condition called undescended testicular religiosity and education, researchers found twice the likelihood of testicular cancer for the men who had ever used marijuana. Surprisingly, the study also found that half the risk for testicular cancer for the men who had ever used cocaine. Rates of testicular cancer, while increasing over the past 37 years, do not seem to change in any relation to marijuana use, increases or decreases. According to Cancer.gov's Fast Stats, the rate of testicular cancer in 1979 was about 4 in 100,000 men. That year, 16.6% of Americans 12 and older had used marijuana, the highest rate ever recorded by by the government. By 1992, we recorded the lowest rate of marijuana smoking, just 7.9% of Americans had smoked that year, yet the testicular cancer rate increased to over 5 in 100,000. Now, as 11.6% of the population smokes marijuana, the testicular cancer rate is a little under 6 in 100,000. And Republican vice presidential nominee Paul Ryan said in an interview with the Colorado station KRDO that he believes it is up to the states to decide whether to legalize medical marijuana. He told them, quote, "My personal position on these issues has been to let the states decide what they want to do with these things. This is something that is not a high priority of ours," unquote. According to KRDO TV, Ryan made clear that he doesn't believe in the effort, but he nevertheless feels the issue should be reconciled at the state level. Colorado has legalized and highly regulated medical marijuana in their state, and this November they will vote to legalize marijuana for all adults, regardless of the reason. The top of the Republican ticket, Mitt Romney, has said that he does not support medical marijuana as he thinks it's a way to lay the path to legalization of marijuana, something that he has stated he will fight tooth and nail if elected.
Carrie for the 420 Headline News. We'll cover more of those stories in depth in Hour 2's Toker Talk Radio. Make sure you stick around. Coming up next, we go behind the headlines and take a look in depth at Springfield, Missouri, and the government there, their attempt to stop decriminalization.
Thank you for subscribing to the Daily Cannabis Chronicle, a production of the Russ Belville Show, sponsored by the National Cannabis Coalition. For the latest full news stories with analysis and commentary, tune into the Russ Belville Show every weekday at 3 p.m. Pacific Time. Available exclusively at nationalcannabiscoalition.com. For more information on the stories you just heard, visit the Russ Belville Show blog at radicalruss.com.
The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. Please do not give up your precious liberties. There's nothing wrong with standing up for our constitutional rights, and in fact, it's the only way to honor the Constitution that recognizes our natural rights. Treat law enforcement with respect and respect the Constitution by standing up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, stand up for your rights by repeating, "I respectfully invoke all my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak to my attorney, Omar Figueroa." Omar Figueroa has more than a decade of experience in federal and California courts and graduated from Yale University, Stanford Law School, and Trial Lawyers College. Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215. Or on the web at www.omarfigueroa.com.
The Russ Belville Show brings you the best in daily toker tunes every weekday. Each day features a different genre, including Roots Monday,
Folks, here's a story about Mindy the Moocher,
Electric Tuesday, Irie Wednesday,
Summer ganja planter, call me the ganja farmer.
Groovin' Thursday,
Don't you wanna get high?
and Rockin' Friday. Then on weekends, we mix them all together in our weekend music party.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're working on getting behind the headlines. Today, we're having a little difficulty getting our Skype set up here, so we're working on that right this moment. Give us just a second, and we will... you can hear some of the stuff that's going on there. Had the wrong Skype loaded up, but we're going to call up Anthony Johnson. He's with the National Cannabis Coalition, and he was very instrumental in working in Springfield, Missouri on many of the initiatives that they had passed there and working hard for legalization. We'll get Anthony on the line here right away. Just stand by. Dialing out on Skype here. Springfield, Missouri had passed an initiative here for decriminalization of marijuana, and the city council now has recently taken that initiative, and they had the choice of either passing it on to the voters or taking it on themselves. they've taken it on themselves now, and it appears to be to make it something that it wasn't originally intended to be. Anthony, do we have you on the line now? Hello. Oh, hold on a second. Anthony Johnson. Anthony, we got you? Trying to reach Anthony Johnson. Are you there? Okay, so we're having some problems getting Anthony on the phone line right at the moment. So I'll continue to tell you a little bit about this this Springfield initiative. The initiative was signed by 2,100 people had called in or had signed into this initiative to lower the fine for possessing a small amount of pot and making it an infraction rather than a misdemeanor. Now, they could have sent this to the people to continue to uphold this decriminalization, but instead, the city council went and passed it themselves. However, this appears that they have tried to pass this in order to play a little bit of monkey business with it, maybe change it up and make it something it wasn't intended to be. Anthony, do we have you on the line?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Anthony. Anthony Johnson, the executive director of National Cannabis Coalition. Now, you lived out there in Springfield for a long time and worked in marijuana reform there with various groups. Tell us about your history in Springfield and what's going on with this decrim ordinance.
Yeah, I personally never actually lived in Springfield. I lived in Columbia, Missouri.
I see.
Another college town in Springfield. In Columbia, Missouri, some activists and I with local Missouri NORML chapter, University of Missouri NORML chapter, and Students Essential Drug Policy chapters, we launched an initiative petition that decriminalized personal amounts of marijuana in Columbia, Missouri, as well as another provision that allowed patients to use as a doctor's recommendation, and those passed in Columbia, Missouri in 2004. We were contacted here at the National Cannabis Coalition. We were contacted by activists in Springfield that had started gathering signatures for a very similar measure in Springfield, and we decided to help, and we're major funders of paying signature gatherers to help place this on the ballot in Springfield.
I see. And this this initiative there in Springfield, then, this is the decrim one that they've just accepted, right?
Correct. So the citizens gathered enough valid signatures to place it before the city council. City council had an opportunity to send it on to the voters. Instead, they decided to just pass it. And now on the agenda, they're taking public comments tonight at 6:30, starting at 6:30, the Springfield City Council meeting, because they placed on the agenda 4 amendments to the measure. The most troubling amendment is one that would completely repeal the decriminalization measure and institute the status quo, where people could still be arrested, saddled with the criminal charge. Students can lose their financial aid, not to mention the waste on law enforcement resources. We intend to assist the activists in Springfield, utilize every avenue they have to make sure that the initiative process is not abused in this way. Mm-hmm. We think clearly under the Citizens Initiative Charter that the City Council has the right to send this to the voters. They have the right to amend any troubling provisions that may be illegal under city law, but we don't think it's proper to utilize the initiative petition process to really circumvent democracy and not even allow the voters to have their say on the issue.
Is that, though, part of their contention, is that there's parts of this initiative that circumvent state or federal or even city law?
Well, there are 2 provisions that they have problems with legally. One would establish a citizen oversight committee to make sure that the city police and city prosecutors are indeed following the law. Seattle, when they instituted a lowest law enforcement priority measure, I believe it was in around 96, 98, and that measure passed, they instituted a citizen oversight committee, but Springfield City Council tends to believe that's illegal in Springfield. And another provision would expunge the arrest and charge of your marijuana conviction, even at the city offense, after 2 years. And they say that's also illegal and not in the power of the city to do that, even though Columbia, Missouri, they have an expungement provision that's been utilized for minor and possession charges, and there's really no case law that says these provisions are illegal. Without conceding that those provisions are illegal, we have told the city council that we're willing to compromise with them and take out those 2 provisions as long as the the main meat of the initiative, the fact that people would no longer be arrested and no longer saddled with a criminal offense, if that remains, we're willing to compromise. We're not willing to compromise on that issue. We don't think those provisions are illegal, but if the city council wants to take those out, they'll leave the rest. We've let them know we are okay with that, but we're not okay with repealing the entire ordinance.
All right. Well, it's a sticky situation going out there in Springfield, and we'll have you back on the show to give us updates as they become available. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks so much, Russ.
You know what that sound means? It's 20 after the hour, 4:20 for our friends on the East Coast, and 20 after the hour almost everywhere. So light them if you got them. Be right back.
Oh, have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. If he said he swam to China, he would sell you South Carolina. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man. Have you ever met
Dear
that
Mom,
funny
when I was in college, I used to drink a lot. It was kind of crazy. But now that I'm older, I prefer to use marijuana. It's less harmful to my body, I don't get hungover, and honestly, I feel safer around marijuana users. I hope this makes sense, but if not, let's talk. I love you.
Of the last 7 major party candidates to run for president, 3 of the last 7 vice presidential candidates, and the last 3 presidents have all smoked pot. Marijuana, the gateway drug to the White House. This is the Russ Belville Show. Everyone knows music and marijuana go together, so let's wind up our 20 after break with the Russ Belville Show's Daily Toker Tunes, the best in pod-safe 420 music from around the web. Today is Roots Monday, featuring the blues, country, folk, and jazz music that birthed the modern sounds we enjoy today. You can get downloads and more information about all our Daily Toker Tunes by visiting music.radicalruss.com. Now, sit back and enjoy your Daily Toker Tunes.
Well, we've kind of foreshadowed what the tune is for today. It's Cab Calloway, the reefer man himself, one of the legends of the reefer jazz movement from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and his classic song, well-known song, Minnie the Moocher. And of course, the reason I bring this song up, we've played it a few times on the show, but anytime that I'm launching or starting something new, I always feel like having something that's really solid in your corner, or something to back you up. You know, nothing's better than Cab Calloway as far as, you know, getting me in that mood to want to do this job, to want to be here, and to want to spread the message of legalization. And the reason I say that, I mean, there's a personal reason and there's a professional reason. The personal reason, of course, you know, I grew up as a musician. I took band in school, and when I was first starting out playing the bass is when the Blues Brothers movie was out with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd. And of course, all that great blues music from that time and from that movie, and of course, Cab Calloway played a role in that movie. And I was introduced to that type of music, and it really, you know, I've liked it ever since. But the more professional reason why is because I always go back to these arguments with prohibitionists who talk about why marijuana is illegal but alcohol is legal. And a lot of times they will come back and they will say, well, we've got a culture around alcohol. We've got a culture around alcohol that understands, you know, how it should be used, and it's social and people are just having a good time. Well, I make the argument that there is a culture around marijuana that goes back to at least the 1900s. And when you get songs like Cab Calloway singing The Reefer Man, and Louis Armstrong talking about blowing gauge, and Mesro, and all these cats out there that were using marijuana and popularizing its use, you cannot deny that we have a marijuana culture that is older than marijuana prohibition. So there is no reason why we can't recognize, and especially now, today, with the movies and the television shows that so openly display marijuana use, that we cannot deny that it is culture. So in celebration of that culture, one of the best songs of the marijuana culture, this is Cab Calloway and his orchestra with Minnie the Moocher.
Here's a story about Minnie the Moocher. She was a red-hot hoochie coocher. She was the roughest, toughest frail, but Minnie had a heart as big as a whale. Ho-dee-ho, dee-ho, ho-dee-ho, dee-ho, hi-dee-hi, dee-hi, hi-dee-hi, dee-hi, hey-dee, 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 hey, hey-dee, 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 hey, ho-dee-ho, dee-ho, ho-dee-ho, dee-ho. She messed around with a bloke named Smokey. She loved him, though he was cokey. He took her down to Chinatown, and he showed her how to kick the gong around. Hey, 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 oi, 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 ay, 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 ay. Dream about the king of sweets. He gave her things that she was needing. He gave her a built of gold and steel, a diamond car with big platinum wheels. Howdy, 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 howdy. Each meal she ate was a dozen courses. She had $1 million worth of nickels and dimes. What did she do? She sat around and counted them all 1,000,000 times. Hi, dee, hi, dee, hi, hi, dee, hi, dee, hi.
We're back with Paul Armentano after this.
Hi, this is Dan Michaels. If you're looking for professional voice talent for your commercial or podcast, I'm your man. Visit danmichaelsaudio.com for more information. Michael Phelps, Olympic superstar, 14 gold medals, world record holder. So much for that amotivational syndrome. Activism begins with ACT. The Russ Belville Show features the stories of hardworking grassroots activists working for an end to prohibition in today's activist agenda.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're just about half past the hour, and joining us here on our activist agenda, we have NORML's Paul Armentano. He's the deputy director of NORML, joining us here from the Bay Area. Paul, how are you doing?
In broadcast.
Oh, thank you for being here. Sorry about that. I had you on the mute for a little bit, but welcome back. Paul is the Deputy Director of NORML. And before we get into the topic we want to discuss, I wanted to point out I saw across the wires today you had a op-ed in the Christian Science Monitor with my only non-pot smoking friend, Dr. Kevin Sabet, among others. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The Christian Science Monitor, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, is a national publication that is somewhat in the minority regarding its political views in regards to marijuana law reform. The Monitor takes the approach that the current drug war policy is working just fine, and in fact, if anything, we should put even more people in cages for their use of a non-toxic substance like marijuana. But today they were willing to allow their publication to be used as a forum to have some debate on the pending statewide marijuana legalization initiatives. And in their minds, a fair and equal debate was to put me up against not one, but two prohibitionist opponents, your friend Kevin Sabet and David Evans, who is a notorious shill for the drug testing industry and is he resides in New Jersey and often shows up in these sort of debates on the East Coast. Somehow the Christian Science Monitor thought that was a fair debate, one person going up against two people, but given when readers read the actual lack of facts or the dearth of facts within Evans and Kevin's two op-eds, perhaps it is a fair fight.
Yeah, really. I was going to say, you against them, they're certainly outgunned. So I imagine, knowing the two guys that you're debating against, they're trying to frame this as, the legalization versus drug war versus the Goldilocks approach, the just right approach of Kevin Sabet. Was that about what was going on there?
It is. I classified it as they put me on the yes side for legalization and regulation. David Evans takes the no approach, and then Kevin Sabet takes the no but approach because he tries to have caveats to the fact that he's really just out here supporting the continued prohibition of marijuana. And that's really his bottom line. I find it so funny. Kevin, he talks as if somehow under a system of legalization and regulation, we could no longer have options like drug courts and rehabilitation and all these programs that Kevin likes to say are so effective. Obviously, we would still have those programs. They probably would be better funded and better utilized under a system of legalization and regulation. It's not an either-or dichotomy like Kevin wants to keep framing it.
Yeah, and I always point out that, when we look at the statistics of people that are actually put into drug rehabs, of the, 60% of the people that are marijuana-only admissions are there because of the criminal justice system. When they say we don't have enough beds for drug addicts, I think, let's get some of the pot smokers out of those beds and put some meth addicts in there, some alcoholics in there.
Oh, precisely. I mean, you and I are both well aware of the data. It's not just that the majority of those entering rehab are put there by the criminal justice system, but when you go back and you look at those individuals' history of marijuana use, you find that a majority of them have not even had exposure to marijuana in the last 30 or sometimes 60 days, yet they're being put in rehabilitation programs for marijuana dependence. It's absurd.
Yeah, it's like, and the other thing that's frustrating about that is when you take so many people who don't have a problem with marijuana, their only problem is they got caught, and then you subject them to the drug rehab and the drug court system, and they have wonderful outcomes. You test them all the time, and surprise, they don't use marijuana. It really pads their stats. It's kind of like claiming success for teaching a dog to lick itself. It's going to do it anyway, right? I mean, that's what's frustrating about this to me.
Yes, exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. And, unfortunately, the Christian Science Monitor is one of these papers that even though they have a print and also largely an online presence, their online the online version of their paper does not allow for reader comments. So unfortunately, your listeners and others cannot write in and be justly critical of many of the statements made by Kevin Sabet and made by David Evans, but I certainly would encourage readers who are passionate about this issue to write to the editors, write an actual letter to the editor. The Christian Science Monitor still accepts and publishes those, and make it clear to them that you are supportive of marijuana law reform, and that the Christian Science Monitor is really becoming marginalized as being one of the few papers that still has an editorial bent supportive of this failed federal policy.
Now, people can see this debate online at, what is it, csmonitor.com? Is that the website?
I believe so. If you just go into Google and type in Christian Science Monitor, it's going to come up, and just go to their commentary section. And they are calling this segment the 1 minute debate. Because God forbid we give this, real ample time. It's just marijuana after all.
Just marijuana. A minute will do. All right. Let's get to another aspect of this debate, which is, something we've talked about many times, something we're loath to go into because it's just become a very sticky situation no matter how you talk about it. But it's the concept of DUI cannabis, driving under the influence of cannabis, and a new study that came out. I covered it last week, where they claim to say that at the 2 nanogram of THC, active THC in the blood per milliliter, at that level, at 2 nanograms, they say that the tests show an exhibited, 4 times crash risk for people at 2 nanograms. Let's get into that study a little bit and tell us what it really is telling us.
Sure. I like the fact that you wrote this up and that people can read about this study and your interpretation of it on your blog. I thought it's important to get this study out there. This is actually a fairly important study. This data set was collected as part of a much larger ongoing study that's taking place in Europe, and it's a project known as the Driving Under the Influence of Drug, Alcohol, and Medicines Project. And this group has been collecting data for many, many years. And what I like about this study right out of the gate is the methodology. Because the methodology that is employed in this particular study, the researchers here are doing a population-based case control study. And that's a very important differentiation we need to make between the methodology employed in this study and the methodology that's been employed in a lot of these previous driving studies, where essentially researchers are simply going into traffic fatality databases, they're doing some data mining, and then they're working backwards from the fatal accident to try and see what sort of characteristics are common among those individuals engaged in those accidents. Mm-hmm. This sort of population-based case control study is much, much different, because what researchers are doing is they are assessing individuals who have had accidents and required hospitalization, but they're also assessing individuals who are driving and not having any accidents occur whatsoever. So they're actually contrasting those with accidents with those that are driving safely and that are being given roadside drug tests to determine that if these individuals who are driving safely, do they also have drugs and alcohol in their system? And if so, do they have so at either an equal rate, a greater rate, or a lesser rate than those individuals that are driving and having accidents in very similar scenarios? And this is really a gold standard methodology for doing this sort of research. It's known as the Grand Rapids model, and that is because this was a model that was employed many years ago to come up with odds ratios for alcohol, and eventually that led to the blood alcohol per se standards. So I wanted to get that out of the way. I wanted to say there's very strong methodology here. I would also add that the United States is conducting a very similar study, and that study is being done by the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, and they're also employing this methodology. And I've been stressing for some time now in this discussion that we really ought not to jump the gun and talk about potential per se levels and talk about odds ratios until we have the results of these two studies, because the methodology is so much better. My issue with this particular study, however, and you hit the nail on the head in your report as well, is that unfortunately as far as trying to draw any real hard and fast conclusions, is that the number of cases is very, very small. We only have 5 individuals here who have a crash and have cannabis in their system. And there's certainly the potential there that small number of cases may be skewing some of these odds ratios. I'm certainly concerned that we would take odds ratios based on 5 individuals and then apply them to all cannabis users at large. And I think it even shows up in the fact that in this study we see that there's actually lower risk of accident among those that had the highest levels of THC in their system as opposed to those who simply had moderate levels of THC in their system. My guess is that's simply an anomaly among the 2 or 3 people in this study and would not be a finding that would translate to the larger population, and that's the sort of reason why I'm remiss to take a study or the odds ratios based on the results of a study with so few people and then try to extrapolate and apply those to the cannabis-using population at large.
Yeah, as usual, much more study is needed on this, and that study really can't happen until we legalize marijuana for all adults and we can get this into the hands of scientists who can do real studies on this stuff. Hey, folks, if you want to learn more about this, you want to go to the NORML National Conference. It's taking place October, 4th through 6th?
It is, yes, Thursday through Saturday, that first weekend in October, and that's in Los Angeles at the Omni Hotel.
You can get information at norml.org/conference, and Paul will be there, and you will learn so much. Trust me on that. Paul Armentano is NORML's Deputy Director, joining us from the Bay Area. Thanks for calling in today, Paul.
Anytime, Russ. Take care.
All right, and when we come back, we're going to have a little more for you. We've got time for a bit of a radical rant here. Going to talk about legalization here in the state of Oregon, and where are our priorities? Do we going to get this really legalized or not? Stick around, I got a few things to say. Be right back after this.
The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
Have you considered medical marijuana? Double-blind, peer-reviewed studies have found cannabinoid therapies to be successful in treating the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, brain cancers, chronic pain, diabetes mellitus, dystonia, fibromyalgia, GI disorders, hepatitis C, HIV/AIDS, hypertension, incontinence, MRSA, multiple sclerosis, osteoporosis, pruritus, rheumatoid arthritis, sleep apnea, and Tourette's syndrome, as well as anecdotal evidence suggesting relief from anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress, plus reduction in the need for narcotic painkillers. Side effects of medical marijuana can include euphoria, relaxation, anxiety, panic reactions, paranoia, tachycardia, dry eyes, dry mouth, concentration and reaction time impairment, appetite increase, and in 37 states, arrest and incarceration. But medical marijuana is non-toxic and cannot cause overdose. Medical marijuana. It's not for everyone, but ask your doctor if medical marijuana may be right for you.
Georgia. Hi, this is Willie Nelson, and I need your help. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 20s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stop arresting law-abiding citizens because they prefer marijuana over alcohol. Nearly 2,000 Americans are arrested every day on marijuana charges. We're unfairly destroying the lives and careers of hundreds of thousands of people each year simply because they smoke marijuana. These are not criminals. They're average citizens like you, good neighbors who work hard, raise families, pay taxes, and contribute to their communities. We need your help to end marijuana prohibition once and for all. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
You want answers? I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. You want answers? You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers. I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
All right, welcome back. Still cleaning things up here in the studio, getting things readjusted, but time for the Radical Rant. And today I'm going to talk about my home state of Oregon, because while Oregon is one of the 3 states with marijuana legalization on the ballot, with less than 2 months to go before the election, the campaign to pass that marijuana legalization is in desperate shape. This from Yahoo News. Proponents of pot legalization in Washington state have raised nearly $2 million since the initiative qualified for the ballot in January, and about $1 million in Colorado since its measure earned a place on the ballot the following month, according to the most recent campaign figures. In Oregon, where a voter referendum qualified in July, the legalization campaign reported less than $1,000 in contributions. All 3 state measures go to the ballot in November, when Americans vote for president and other offices. Now, New Approach Washington, in addition to the $2 million they've raised, has the endorsement of several high-profile elected officials and members of law enforcement. It's been running a very professionally produced television ad for weeks now. Regulate Marijuana, the Colorado effort, has produced some of the best pro-marijuana legalization ads and billboards I've ever seen, including one that ran during the Democratic National Convention coverage. And my favorite ad of theirs is so compelling I've been humming the Beatles' When I'm 64 for days now. So naturally, with no TV ads on the air and no big money donors contributing and no high-profile supporters except Willie Nelson, activists in Oregon this weekend spent money and time throwing a smoke-in called Hempstock. Now, I understand when I write this and I talk about this that there's going to be accusations of sour grapes, and I'm not trying to demean the great people that volunteer. Some of them are my friends, some of the people that work on this show, very important and involved in Hempstock. But this hemp festival, unlike others, is unique. This has some things about it that make it very unique. Seattle Hemp Fest, Boston Freedom Rally, and the Great Midwest Harvest Fest in Madison, to name a few that I've attended, are set in the downtown areas of large cities. So you can make the argument that the members of the general public are going to be confronted with a legalization message from the speakers and the vendors and the nonprofits that they can't avoid as they make their way through the city. Portland Hempstock, on the other hand, is relegated to Kelly Point Park. So far away from downtown Portland, it is 3.5 miles past the port terminals and industrial areas, 3.5 miles from the nearest residential, out of decent cell phone range, and is technically closer to Vancouver, Washington than it is to Portland, Oregon. So right off the bat, you can pretty much guarantee the people that are going to be making the 10 or more mile journey to Portland Hempstock are what we'd call the choir, people who are going to vote for legalization on the ballot regardless. Now, to be charitable, we could argue that at least Hempstock provides the opportunity to register them as voters and remind them to vote, and that's always a good thing. But the other thing that's unique about Portland Hempstock is how much it depends on one source of funding and volunteers. You'll see the main sponsor banner for the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, otherwise known as THCF, flying from the stage at Hempstock, which happens to be the company of the chief petitioner of the Oregon legalization effort, Paul Stanford. Now, when we look at that side of the equation, you may have heard of Paul Stanford in the news lately. He was hit by the IRS for $2.7 million in tax debt and penalties, a figure he disputes as only a couple million. He was accused by his signature gatherers of stiffing them on pay, which he readily admits to. He even acknowledges owing them, quote, a few $1,000s, end quote, and that, quote, the vast majority, end quote, of that money donated to the campaign comes from THCF. And he says, quote, if I had the money, I'd donate more, end quote, he says. Yet, there seems to be enough money for THCF to sponsor the stage, electricity, security, sanitation, transportation, permits, booths, and other expenses necessary to host a 2-day smoke-in at the outer edge of civilization. To be fair, there are other sponsors of Hempstock. The fees vendors pay also help defray expenses. But since its founding in 2005, Hempstock, to my knowledge, has never made a profit or even broken even. Now, while other hemp fests are promoters of legalization, none of them are so intertwined with the campaign for legalization as Portland Hempstock is with Oregon's Measure 80. Without THCF, there would be no Hempstock, and without THCF, there would be no Measure 80. New Approach Washington sponsored Seattle Hemp Fest as well, but they obviously have the fundraising to afford sponsorship, as well as a well-trafficked public venue and a duty to help inform the potential voters who are being counseled to vote against legalization by members of the Hemp Fest staff themselves. And New Approach Washington's banner at Seattle Hemp Fest was dwarfed by the prime sponsor banner of, wait for it, THCF. Yes, that's right. As petition signature gatherers have to complain to the media to get paid, as the campaign to legalize marijuana in Oregon is running a deficit, and while there is no advertising on Oregon TV airwaves or billboards, Paul Stanford was spending money, and I believe a HempFest Prime sponsorship costs $50,000, on a HempFest in another state that was begrudgingly officially neutral on the marijuana legalization they had on the ballot. But hemp fests are not the only major drain on THCF's ability to mount a professional legalization campaign. Last summer, THCF was the prime sponsor of what was to be a fundraiser for Measure 80, the Hempstead World Music Festival. This 3-day, 3-city event was booked for Eugene, Redmond, and Portland, Oregon on July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, respectively. It was a spectacular failure at each stop, with tiny audiences on hand to hear reggae legend Toots and the Maytals, activist poet John Trudell and Bad Dog, and some other local artists. Now, in Portland, that concert was held at an amphitheater high in the forests of Washington Park on the 4th of July, while simultaneously the enormously popular 4-day Waterfront Blues Festival was happening downtown, something that is scheduled annually and is also for free if one donates cans of food for the food bank, where you could see over 120 acts on 4 stages that included Grammy winners Buddy Guy, Lucinda Williams, and Robert Cray, as well as James Brown's saxophonist, funk legend Maceo Parker. Young student activists from 7 college campuses in Oregon were so dismayed at the reported $200,000 of potential campaign money lost on this concert, they admonished Stanford publicly while voting unanimously to back a competing initiative. Not in the belief it had any better chance of qualifying and passing, and it did not qualify for the ballot, but in the belief that at least it was being run by more responsible campaigners. When Stanford was confronted by the activists on the foolishness of counter-programming against the Waterfront Blues Fest, he apologized and said that if I had known it was going to be such a bust, I wouldn't have done it. Yet, Stanford and THCF sponsored the exact same 3-city, 3-day fundraising concert idea the year before. It was headlined by, again, John Trudell and Bad Dog. It overcharged for tickets, and it was attended by at best 24 people per city. I was actually performing at one of them with Tim Pate at one of the gigs, and it was sad to see so many empty chairs, knowing that the money renting the hall and hiring the band could have been spent on campaigning for a medical marijuana dispensary measure that was on the ballot at the time. Now, supporters of Hempstock have already criticized me for my viewpoint on this. I mean, Libertarian Vice Presidential Candidate Judge Jim Gray and Green Party Presidential Candidate Dr. Jill Stein were speaking at Hempstock, so that doesn't make it a waste of time, does it? And what's wrong with celebrating freedom and rewarding volunteers? Well, I'm happy that third-party candidates came to speak to people who will already vote for legalization, but understand that their appearance there was to pull votes for their candidacies in a state that is already polling 50% Obama, 42% Romney. Neither is going to win the presidency and help legalize marijuana in Oregon. The only effect they could possibly have on the election is to help inaugurate a President Romney who will, quote, fight medical marijuana tooth and nail, end quote, much less legalize marijuana for healthy people in Oregon. And as far as celebrating freedoms, I'd prefer to do that on November 7th after we've passed legalization in Oregon, thanks. We should all be thrilled here in Oregon that legalization is on the ballot, but with no real campaign to speak of, how disappointing will it be when it loses badly at the ballot box? It already has a tough row to hoe in being the only legalization of the 3 states that proposes no limit whatsoever on personal possession and cultivation. You could literally plant your entire backyard and pot and store bales of it in your garage. Legalization in Oregon, even when asked in the general should marijuana be legal sense, doesn't even pass yet. with the July PPP poll coming up at 43% support, 46% opposition, 11% undecided on the general question of legalization. Now, nobody yet knows the poll on should it be legal to have personal cultivation and possession without limits, because there's no campaign money to fund that poll. But I'm guessing it would poll significantly worse. In 2010, activists here in Oregon ran Measure 74, and it was an initiative to create a regulated supply system for the state's medical marijuana patients. It contained strict limits on cultivation and possession for producers and suppliers who would have been licensed by the state. That measure failed at the ballot box with just 44% of the vote, close to that same 43% of the vote who support general legalization now. I fear that without any campaign to speak of, and the easy attacks opponents have in the limited personal use and teach our kids how great pot is, it will poll worse than the dispensary measure and maybe not even break 40%. The situation's become so dire that some activists may organize fundraising to promote Measure 80 with an organization separate from the official Measure 80 campaign. I've heard from several activists that there are some large money donors who want desperately to support legalization in Oregon, but will not contribute one dime to anything Paul Stanford touches. His history of financial mismanagement is well documented by Oregon media, and they don't want their names or companies associated with that. Oregonians deserve a better shot at legalization and leadership more concerned with actually winning than throwing parties and wasting money. Unfortunately, if Measure 80 goes down in an embarrassing defeat, Stanford and THCF won't back away, recognize deficiencies and work to correct them, or even step aside to support other leaders with perhaps less damaging baggage and better polling legalization language. Nope, Stanford's a man on a mission, a true believer who was taken down by the man and now has sworn that he will be the one who legalizes marijuana in Oregon. That'll show him. And so long as there is a burgeoning medical marijuana community that both reveres and enriches him, he'll be able to keep plugging away at the same octa he's been pushing since the 1980s. All right, folks, that's all we got for the Radical Rant today. But stick around for Hour 2. Toker Talk Radio will be taking your calls at 971-533-7111. We're live here on theweedblog.com, on pot.tv, and, of course, right here at radicalruss.com, where you can find all the blog posts. It's been a tough day. You'll find all the blog posts, the videos, the replays of the shows, podcast links, and more. Sign up for a membership. Tell everyone you know about it. Be back tomorrow. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
deep